What's up guys, Asian here with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Stamina Sorcerer, a DPS class that's kind of been a little bit overlooked and overshadowed by the emphasis on Stamina DKs and Stamina Nightblades. Stam Sorcs are still a very powerful Stamina DPS class. In fact, they can pull, and I've seen them pull, as high numbers as Stam DKs and Stamina Nightblades. The main reason why you don't really see Stamina Sorcs being promoted more often is because they don't really have a good group utility benefit. So Stam DKs can provide minor brutality, and Stamina Nightblades can provide minor savagery, which increases weapon damage and weapon crit, respectively. But Stam Sorcs don't really have anything that helps boost the group. They can provide minor prophecy if they use a dark magic ability, but most Stam Sorc builds won't be using any dark magic abilities, so that's kind of not really there. So Stam Sorcs lack that group utility, but they do make up for it with pretty good survivability, because they do have a class ability that gives them minor and major ward and resist and resolve, so they have a lot better survivability compared to other stamina classes, and of course they pull pretty good numbers as well. So like our other builds, we're going to be going over gear, skill bars, alternatives for both of them, CP point distribution, and then we'll be talking about our rotation, skill prioritizations, things like that. And then we'll be going over a 6 million dummy par so you guys can get an idea of the sustain that you can expect to see on a Stamina Sorc, as well as kind of get an idea of what the rotation will look like in a prolonged fight. So starting things off with gear. For our monster helm, we're going with Velidreth. I have one heavy with a health enchant. You can go with a medium with a stamina enchant, or you can go with a heavy with a stamina enchant. It's kind of up to you. I have the heavy with the health enchant, so I can get up to 17k health. Remember, that's kind of the recommended health for vet content, so if you do go with a stam with medium shoulder with a stamina enchant, you won't be hitting that 17k health. So that's something you want to keep in mind when you're deciding whether you want to go all medium or have one heavy piece. For our first set, we're going to be using automatons. This comes from Darkshade Caverns, either 1 or 2. Because Stam Sorcs have a lot of physical damage abilities, I believe the only non-physical damage source is going to be Poison Injection and your Poison Weapon enchant, as well as your Double Ravage Health poisons if you use those. So automatons will end up outperforming Hunding's Rage. That being said, Hunding's is a lot easier to obtain. You don't have to farm it because it is a crafted set. So Hunding's is also a good alternative if you don't have a full set of automatons ready and available. Other alternatives include the debuff sets. Classic ones are Nightmother's Gaze and Sunderflame. You might also be asked to wear Morag Tongs if you have 2 or more Stam DKs in your group. So those are the 3 debuff sets that you might be asked to wear. Primarily, if you are going to be using a debuff set, it's going to be Nightmother's Gaze. Sunderflame doesn't really work very well with Stam Sorcs. They work better with Stamina DKs. But you might be asked to use Sunderflame nonetheless, so it is a good idea to have all 3 sets ready to go if you are intending on doing competitive endgame raiding. For our next set, we're going to be using Vicious Ophidian. This comes from all the Kra'gh trials. This is our source of Minor Slayer. While you could use War Machine, because Sorcs do have a lower ultimate cost compared to the other stamina classes, you don't really have a cheap ultimate to spam to take advantage of War Machine, so it won't be as effective on a Stam Sorc compared to, for example, a Stamina Nightblade or a Stamina Templar. So that's something you want to keep in mind. So that's going to be our second set. The 8% reduction on stamina abilities is actually pretty strong for Stamina Sorcs. Even though we are going with a heavy attack build, the 8% reduction in stamina cost is pretty nice to have. For our jewelry, we're going with 3 weapon damage enchants, again because we are going with a heavy attack build, so regen shouldn't be as big of an issue compared to Magicka DPS. You can replace one of these with the regen glyph if you would like, but you will see a noticeable drop in DPS as a result. For our weapons, I'm going with 2 automaton daggers, but you can go with an axe and a dagger. The axe will give you higher single target DPS at the expense of some cleave damage, because you are losing out on crit, which affects your AoEs. But that's kind of up to you. I like dual daggers. So your traits are going to be Nirn with a poison damage enchant on your front bar or your main hand, and then infused with a weapon damage enchant on your offhand. I have done tests comparing a bunch of different dual wield traits, and this is kind of what ended up pulling the highest DPS, but you can play around between infused, nirn honed, and precise. Infused on main hand and precise on offhand. The one that used to be the best is still very strong in this patch. It just doesn't pull as high as nirn main hand, infused offhand. Now, while I am using automatons as my dual wield bar, you can go with Vicious Ophidian as well. That's kind of based on which set you're running and how RNG decides to bless you with weapon drops. So I'm going with automatons, but you can go with Vicious Ophidian. If you're using Hundings or Night Mother's Gaze, probably best to go with weapons because, again, those are crafted sets, so it's easy to obtain those weapons and the traits that you want, so you don't have to hope for a correct weapon drop, and then you have to farm for crystals to transmute it into the right trait if you didn't get the right trait. So that's kind of the advantage of running Night Mothers or Hundings. It's just crafted, so it's easier to get the specific traits and weapons that you want. For our back bar, we're running a Maelstrom Bow. I have a sharpened bow, but the best in slot is going to be nirn honed, with precise coming in as a close second. You can use sharpened like I have here, but do keep in mind that if you're going over the penetration cap of 18,200, you start losing DPS because that extra penetration isn't doing you any good. So that's something to keep in mind if you want to use sharpened on any of your weapons. We are going with a Double Ravage Health poison. These can be made with Fleshfly Larva, Nightshade, and Nirn Root, so pretty cheap ingredients to buy off of Guild Traders, so there's really no reason not to use Double Ravage Health poisons on your build. One other thing, gear replacement that you could use, because Velidreth comes from Cradle of Shadows, which is a DLC dungeon from the Shadows of the Hist, and it is a difficult dungeon to complete, you can go with Stormfist instead. Stormfist comes from Tempest Island, which is a lot easier to clear, so you can go with Stormfist instead. The downside of Stormfist is you lose out on some weapon damage. You do gain some stamina recovery, which is nice to have, and the other big thing with Stormfist is if you have a mobile boss, it's not going to do as much damage because the proc itself doesn't actually move with the boss. It stays wherever it happens to proc. So if the boss is jumping around a lot, you're not going to be able to get as high DPS from Stormfist compared to Velidreth's. But it is still a viable alternative to use. Another monster helm that you can use is Selene's. That comes from Selene's Web, another very easy dungeon to complete. So you can use Stormfist or Selene's until you get your Velidreth's helm. Now going over attributes and Mundus Stone, I have 64 points into stamina. If you go with all medium, 7 medium pieces, you might need to move some points out of stamina into health in order to hit that 17k health requirement, or I guess recommended amount for vet trials. So do keep that in mind, but if you want to go all out for all damage, then 64 points into stamina is the way to go. For our Mundus, we're going with the Warrior. You can use the lever for 4-man content or solo content like overworld questing or VMA. However, do keep in mind that if you decide to use the lever and you are again going over the penetration cap, you will start losing DPS. So in organized 12-man trials, the Warrior is typically going to outperform the lever in terms of DPS. We are going to be using blue food, max health and max stamina, and we will be using Essence of Weapon Power pots. Those are made with Blessed Thistle, Dragonthorn, and Wormwood. So those will give that weapon power pots will give you your major brutality, major savagery, and restore some stamina for you. So make sure to be using those as well. Now I am a Khajiit. I am a cat. However, the best race for stamina DPS right now is the Redguard because of the Adrenaline Rush passive that gives you stamina whenever you deal a melee attack. So Redguards have much higher sustain compared to Khajiits. Khajiits have higher crit chance though through their Savage passive, which gives them, I believe it is a 7% crit chance, 8% crit chance through Carnage. So they do get some nice additional boost to crit. Another potential race option is going to be Bosmer, your Wood Elves. They get some 6% max stamina and 21% stamina regen, so they do have some racial passives that boost their stamina, but they don't get as much of a DPS boost compared to Khajiits with their extra crit and Redguards with their added sustain through Adrenaline Rush, so Bosmer are kind of a third choice for race. And then another choice for race, if you do have the Imperial upgrade, are Imperials, they get max health and max stamina, which means you can go 7 medium and 64 points of stamina with an Imperial and still make that 17k recommended health cutoff. You do get lower stamina boost, you only get 5% additional stamina, so there is that downside of it. it, plus it also requires you to have the Imperial upgrade, which does cost some extra money. So if you do have access to Imperials though, it is a potential choice to pick for as a race for stamina DPS. Moving on now to our skills. For our front bar, we are going with Blood Craze. You can go with the other morph, Rending Slashes. Blood Craze will give you a nice heal over time, but Rending Slashes does give you the higher DPS by a pretty small margin. Shrouded Daggers is going to be our main spammable besides our heavy attacks. Deadly Cloak, Hurricane, Bound Armaments, and Flawless Dawnbreaker. We won't be using Flawless Dawnbreaker as our primary damage ultimate. This is just there for the weapon damage passive boost. We get 8% boost, 5 from Dawnbreaker, and 3 from the Fighter's Guild's passive. For our back bar, we're going with the Razor Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, the classic staples to all stamina DPS. Rearming Trap, we have the double bar Bound Armaments, and we have Ballista. This is going to be the primary ultimate that we use for damage. So if you do want to replace any of these abilities, the only one that I could say you can replace is probably going to be Rearming Trap or Blood Craze. If you want to put down Vigor or Power Surge, or not Power Surge, what's it called? Yeah, Crit Surge, then you're going to want to probably replace Blood Craze or Rending Slashes first. That's probably the ability that I would replace, because you don't really want to replace anything on your back bar if you can help it. These 3 dots are all very strong, and then Rearming Trap gives you minor force, which is pretty powerful boost to your DPS. Obviously you don't want to get rid of Deadly Cloak for that mitigation, and Hurricane gives you your major resolve and major ward, so you kind of want to avoid taking getting rid of Hurricane as well. So I would say probably Blood Craze is the best ability that you can replace with Vigor or Crit Surge if you decide to run a self-heal as well. Moving on to our champion points. 75 into Mooncast, 75 into Tenacity. You have 26 into Warlord, 26 into Tumbling, and 28 into Shadow Ward. You can kind of divide those the remaining 80 champion points you have into those last 3 however you would like. This is kind of a more balanced approach. For our blue CP, I have 40 into Mastered Arms, 61 to Thaumaturge, 61 into Precise Strikes, 49 into Mighty, and 19 into Piercing. Now, a quick note about Piercing, just like with Lover and Sharpened, if you are going over the penetration cap, you will start losing DPS if you put too many points into Piercing. So do keep that in mind, figure out how much penetration you're getting from your debuffs, and adjust accordingly. So this particular setup is designed for my primary raid group, where we get Sunderflame, Night Mother's Gaze, Power of the Light, and Infused Thorax Crusher, but we don't get Alkosh, so that's where why I have points into Piercing right there. If you have Alkosh and you have an Infused Thorax Crusher, you actually don't need any points into Piercing. If you have just a plain Infused Crusher, I believe you only need 4 or 5 points into Piercing to make the penetration cap. So that's something to keep in mind. If you do need to put points out of Piercing into other nodes, try to put them into Mighty. Try to get up to 56 with Mighty. Do remember you do get diminishing returns the more CP points you put into these passives, so you don't want to go too high, because then you're starting to lose the efficacy of your CP points. So 56 into Mighty is probably the highest I would go. 61 in Precise Strikes and Thaumaturge is where I would sit for those 2, and then you can put the remaining points into Mastered Arms, trying to hit those jump points. If you have to take points out, try not to touch Mighty if you can help it, and try not to take too many points out of Thaumaturge and Precise Strikes. I would probably recommend not going much lower than 56. You can go down to 49 if you'd like, but I wouldn't recommend it. 56 is probably the bare minimum that I would recommend for Thaumaturge and Precise Strikes, so you're going to want to take points out of Mastered Arms. Now for our red CPs, this is a one-size-fits-most distribution. Depending on the content you're going to run, you might need to redistribute your CPs accordingly. For example, if you're going to run the Hellra Citadel, you're going to take more physical damage compared to magic damage, so it might be more beneficial for you to put some points into Hardy and take them out of Elemental Defender. Or you can just kind of stick with what I have, which is a one-size-fits-most scenario. I have 52 into Ironclad, 1 into Spell Shield, 1 into Medium Armor Focus. Then I have 48 into Thick Skin and 64 into Hardy and Elemental Defender. So that pretty much covers it in terms of gear, skills, and CP point distributions. So now I kind of want to talk about the rotation and kind of the mindset behind the rotation itself. So much like with other stamina DPS, our skill prioritization is pretty much constant. It's going to be Endless Hail, Razor Caltrops, Poison Injection. Those are the 3 ones that you're going to want to try to keep up at all times. Rearming Trap is nice to have for the minor force, but you can drop it if you need to break out of your rotation. And the other two on your front bar that I would recommend trying to keep up is going to be Deadly Cloak and Hurricane. Deadly Cloak not so much for the damage, more for the 25% mitigation that you get from AoEs, and Hurricane is a very powerful move. It does deal a significant amount of DPS, but it also gives you minor resolve and major resolve and major ward, which gives you an 8% reduction in incoming damage. So that's why you want to keep those up. So if you do have to drop a dot, I would say drop Blood Craze or Rending Slashes first, and then drop a Rearming Trap if you do have to break out of your rotation. So what I like to do is that if I have to break out of my rotation for any means, I take a look at at my uptime for Deadly Cloak and Hurricane. If there's still time left on it, like around 5 or 6 seconds, I'll just go to my back bar and do my back bar rotation, and then go back and re-up Deadly Cloak and Hurricane. If those two buffs are about to run out, then I will just reapply them early, and then go back to my back bar and restart my rotation from my back bar. So your rotation is going to look like this. If you are using Crit Surge, make sure to use that before you enter combat. You're going to obviously buff up with your potion first. You will be using your Ballista on the bar swap, so you won't be using it right away. You're going to be, because you do want to have that Hawkeye passive, because that does boost your damage that you deal with Ballista by a sizable margin. So that's why you want to use it last, so you can get the most out of your Hawkeye stacks. So you're going to use your potion. If you have Crit Surge, make sure to pop that. I like to start off with Rearming Trap, but you don't have to. And then you want to light weave between all your abilities. Then you just going to want a heavy weave on your front bar. Now, because all of your dots have varying lengths, particularly Hurricane, because Hurricane has a 15-second duration, you're not going to want to re-up Hurricane too soon, because every tick it does actually deals more and more damage. So you're going to want to let your Hurricane run almost completely out before you reapply it. So here I would use Ballista now, before I swapped back to my front bar there. So if Hurricane goes down while you're on your back bar, you want to re-up that first before you re-up anything else. So that's kind of what the rotation looks like on a Stamsorc there. So we're pretty much going with all heavy weaves on the front bar except for our first ability. So we will light weave into our first ability on our front bar like so, but we'll heavy attack before every ability afterwards. And then for a back bar, like I said, you want to use Ballista last in order to take advantage of your Hawkeye stack. So if you hit all your light weaves, you should have 1, 2, 3, 4. You should have 4 Hawkeye stacks. If you want, you can light attack after you put Rearming Trap down to get that 5th Hawkeye stack, but that's kind of up to you if you want to do that or not. So now we're just going to wait until we're out of combat, and then we're going to show you a 6 million parse so you guys can get an idea of what the rotation looks like. I'll try to narrate throughout the rotation so you guys get an idea of what my mindset is during a parse and kind of point out the important parts. But do keep in mind I will be focusing on my parse instead. So I apologize in advance if I'm not talking as much. Do keep in mind that Stamsorcs don't have a source of major fracture, unlike Stam DKs and Stamina Nightblades and Stamina Wardens. So our parse is going to be lower, but I will do some math behind the scenes to kind of show you guys what you would be able to pull if you had major fracture up. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started with our parse. Because Hurricane has a bit of a weird duration, you want to let it run almost completely out. Again, we're light weaving our first ability on our front bar, and just heavy attacking afterwards. mess up that rotation there. So you want to try to make Blood Craze your first ability on your front bar. Messing up my rotation left and right today. You can see here we are starting to run low on stamina a little bit. Alright, so we actually did run out of stamina at the very end there. If you are a Redguard, you won't be having as big of a sustain problem because you will be getting stamina back through Adrenaline Rush. I am a Khajiit, like I said, so I do lose out on that sustain. So kind of saw what the rotation looks like. I'm not as familiar with, or not familiar, but not as comfortable with my Stam Sorc as I am with other stamina DPS classes. So you saw me kind of screw up my front bar rotation a little bit there, just because I'm not as fluent with the rotation itself. But taking a quick look at our combat metrics parse, we pulled 33.8k. If we did have Major Fracture up, Major Fracture provides 8% additional DPS just through the debuff itself, so we would be pulling roughly 36.5k instead if we did have Major Fracture up. So that's pretty comparable to Stamina DK. That's a little bit lower than the Stamina DK. So do keep that in mind. You're obviously going to vary, and this isn't my best Stamina DPS class, so obviously if you main a Stamina Sorc, you can definitely have the potential to pull higher than a Stamina DK. So you can see here that Endless Hail, Razor Caltrops are obviously their top 2 DPS contributors. For all stamina DPS, they're typically going to end up being top 2. Ballista deals a significant amount of damage, and it really helps out that we try to maximize our Hawkeye stacks before we go ahead and use our Ballista. Then we have Poison Injection, Blood Craze, Hurricane. So a lot of these dots are pretty strong, but again, even though Hurricane doesn't deal as much DPS compared to, for example, Poison Injection or Blood Craze, it gives you the major resolve and major ward buff. So you want to maintain those as much as you can, because that's just extra survivability, that's extra damage mitigation. So you want to make sure Hurricane is up as much as you can. And the same thing with Blade Cloak. Even though it doesn't contribute a lot of DPS, that 25% mitigation from AoEs is still pretty strong. It's a very nice buff to have, so you want to make sure to maintain Blade Cloak at all times if you can have it. And Rearming Trap, while it doesn't contribute as much DPS, Minor Force is still a nice boost to your overall DPS, so try not to drop Rearming Trap too much if you can help it, but if you do need to drop it, then that's so be it. You're probably not going to see that big of a dip into your DPS as long as you re-up it as soon as you can. So that's it for this video. Hope you guys found it informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.